Recording here. All right, it's recording.
All right, welcome everybody. This is an Empathy Cafe as part of the Bridging Political Divides with Empathy Circles project. We've been doing these for a few months now, and we invite people from the political left and right or any political ideology or perspective to come and listen to each other. And we use a format that helps us to really feel heard and make sure we're listening. Tonight, the topic is ethics and tactics. And of course, you can also talk about anything that you'd like to, but some of the questions that I put up were, how do you feel about the idea of by any means necessary to achieve your political goals? Or
did you say fighting? I'm sorry.
Sorry, what was that?
Did you say fighting as necessary? Or what? I'm sorry. What did you
By
say?
any means necessary.
Oh, by any.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
By any means necessary. Like, do you agree with? Is there anything that you would use any means to
For my
fight
family.
for, or that we're not starting yet. Just
Okay.
saying the topic. And if not, then what are your guidelines for ethics and tactics in achieving political goals? And then, like I said, of course, you can always share about anything. So first of all, we'll kind of go around and introduce ourselves, say where you're from if you want, and kind of where you're at politically. And I guess I can start, and then I'll just say people's names as you appear on my screen. So my name is Megan. I live in Chico, California, and I have traditionally, I guess, been more like on the left, but also anarchist and not really agreeing with or supporting most of what people seem to take for granted within the political system as it is. Also incorporating a needs-based framework, just wanting humans to have their needs met. So Edwin, you next.
Okay, I'm Edwin Rutch from El Cerrito, which is near Berkeley. And like Megan, it's my political leanings is moving towards the empathic, towards seeing everyone's humanity, moving away from the left-right to an empathic standpoint.
All right, Nicholas next.
All right, my name's Nicholas. I'm from Chico, Northern California area, and I lean towards socialism.
All right, thank you. David, what's you next?
Hello, my name's David. I am located in San Francisco, and for all intents and purposes, I am a lean to the right.
Thank you. And then I don't know what your name is. It says iPad3. How would you say your name?
Jessica.
Oh, Jessica.
Hi. I'm Jessica. I live in Alameda. And under the current political nomenclature, I would say I'm on the right. But in all practical purposes, I'm more of a classical, what would be considered a classical liberal, which is more like a John Kennedy type of a liberal.
Thank you. Then I think the next person is Corey.
Hi, I'm Corey. I'm also in Chico, California. I am far to the left, and I'm also don't support a lot of the things that it seems to be taken for granted that liberals or left-leaning people support. And consider myself to be like in the political realm. I feel sort of pragmatic. Like there's There's certain I might vote for someone even though I don't line up with them all the way, but in the more real life sphere, I feel like I'm further to left and like more in the coming from an anarchist perspective.
All right. I didn't miss anybody, right?
There's somebody, oh, the phone number is you. Okay.
So I don't think we have enough people for a breakout group. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah.
We can
that's
do a breakout.
fine. So
3.
It's
You wanna do a
probably
breakout?
good for 3 is a little small for,
Yeah. Okay. All right. it's up
I
to you
think
guys.
6 is doable.
Okay.
If there was one more person, then maybe 2 groups, but just 6, it's, yeah.
Okay.
then I guess we'll go ahead and get started.
I think
David, would you
just-
like? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. Jessica's new, so like this first share would kind of show Jessica like.
Yeah.
All right.
I was going to ask if you wanted to do an example.
So Jessica, right now Megan picked me, and now I listen to Megan, and I repeat basically back what she tells me in my own words, and then she lets me know whether or not she
Oh.
feels heard.
I was
Okay.
going to ask if you wanted to talk to me, but we
Oh,
can go the other way. Or yeah, do you want to talk to me?
how about you start it out, Megan?
Okay. So, we need a timekeeper. I'm talking to you right now with someone else. I keep time.
5 minutes, and maybe Edwin is a good timekeeper.
I got trapped. I thought I was going to get away with just enjoying myself there.
I'm putting you to work, man.
Oh man, this is cruel. Okay, I'll do it.
I can keep time.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh.
Go for it, Ethan. I think we've been doing finding 6 actually works really well. Or on the one earlier today, didn't we change it to 6?
Yeah, 6 minutes. Yeah, 6
6
minutes.
minutes?
Okay.
Okay. And
We
I'll
give
just
a
hold
warning
my
at, like,
phone up when it's at the 1 minute mark, when it's 1 minute left or 30 seconds.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay. So the first thing I guess I want to say about this idea of ethics and by any means necessary is that I think this has somewhat more to do with how desperate people are than how principled people are. Or at least it has to do with both. I'll wait.
Okay, so you said that as far as ethics and tactics are concerned, you think that has more to do with how desperate people are than what was that last part?
Than how principled people are.
It seems to ethics and tactics seems to have more to do with how desperate people are than how sensible they are.
Principled, like
Like how
ethical.
it's more to do with desperation than principles.
Yeah, or at least it has to do with both. Like that, I'd like to think, I have certain ideas about how to go about things, but if I'm desperate enough for something, especially something a basic need like food or water, at a certain point, I think those principles go out the window and our basic instincts kick in for survival.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you said that you have a certain idea about what is a good way about getting what you need. You think when it reaches a certain degree of desperation that I guess you're insinuating that softer methods or civility perhaps goes out the window due to the desperation.
Like if people can't get their needs met through a softer or civil manner, then eventually I think it's not human nature, at least human tendency to resort to whatever it takes, like trickery, manipulation, violence, to get needs met.
You said for people to get their needs met, if it's a desperate enough situation, that it's human nature to do what needs to be done to get their needs met.
Yeah, there might be some exceptions to that, like people who are just so committed to like not hurting anyone that they would just let themselves suffer or die. But I don't think it's super common.
Okay, you said there was there's probably some exceptions that some people would be quiet, would suffer quietly, so to speak. But you think for the most part not? Did I get that right? If you could
Yeah.
hold the phone a little bit closer to your mouth so I can hear you a little better.
Oh, sorry, my voice seems really loud in my own ear.
Yeah.
Okay. So the last thing I want to say about that is that when I see people right now in the political situation resorting to what seem like really drastic or violent tactics, on a certain level, I interpret that as desperation.
Okay, you said when you see protests and stuff getting more and more violent, you see that as people getting more desperate.
Or not just a protest, like it could include fighting at protests, it could include people like bombing things or whatever it may be, that it's a sign of desperation and that people don't know how else to get their needs met. It doesn't mean there isn't another way to get their needs met, but they can't think of it. Maybe they've already tried a lot of things and they can't think of another way.
So you said that when you see people doing desperate things just in general to get their needs met, that it's perhaps that's the only way they can think of to accomplish their goals.
I mean, I would say it's the only way they can think of to, well, not necessarily meet their needs, but try to meet their needs. It may or may not be effective.
So, I mean, when these people are becoming more uncivilized, for lack of a better word, they're trying to get their needs met. It's not necessarily successful.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and stop there then.
Okay. All right, Jessica, did you see how that went? That's basically how it goes. You just reiterate what the person tells you in your own words, and then it's your turn. You pick someone, and then they do the same for you, and goes on like that. So, who is it? How about Nicholas?
Okay.
All right, ethics and tactics. Where to start? Well, I can say that the tactics of the contemporary radical left caused me to become pretty much apolitical, and it caused me to become political and to lean to the right because I was rather disgusted at tactics.
Okay, so David, what I'm hearing you say is that the tactics of the far left have made you disgusted and have made you want to become more political. Is that right?
Yes. And as far as getting needs met, that term can really be abused because I'm pretty sure a lot of these mass protesters have houses and food on the table, and are are not suffering that bad. I mean, I wasn't that angry when I lived on the streets.
Okay, so you're saying that you feel that the term desperation is not necessarily
That-
needs met. Sorry, you're saying that people getting their needs met, you feel like people have their needs met and maybe they're reacting more violently than they need to based on their needs.
Yes.
Okay.
And I added a personal thing of like, even whenever I didn't have a home, I wasn't that, violent about that. Anyway, so let's see here. So tactics are very important. I mean, a lot of these people said they're doing it for other people, for people without a voice, so to speak. A lot of people, I think a lot of these white kids say they're using their white privilege to fight for people who can't fight for themselves, which I think it's kind of a weak argument because, I mean, minorities or whatever oppressed group that they're fighting for, they are all fairly vocal in this country. They have a voice.
So you're saying that you feel that people being violent that are white because they want to represent people of color are not necessarily justified in that reasoning because people of color already have a voice. Is that right?
Yeah, well, they know how to voice their opinions. I think a lot of this rhetoric is just justified violence. I think people are pissed off at Trump. He offends them. They are angry, and the way they deal with their anger is with violence, to punch the person that they don't like.
Okay, so David, you're saying that you think that people are angry at Trump and they're using it to justify violence.
Yes, I don't think it has anything to do with getting their needs met. I think they're just angry and violent, and that's how they want to express it.
Okay, so David, you're saying that you think people are angry and violent and they're using this as an excuse to be angry and violent.
Yes. There's a lot of things in the world I don't like, but I don't go around punching it in the face. It's like, it's a very cheap tactic. And I understand what it's like to be young and angry. I understand that. But I think I really personally, even though I've had personal encounters with Antifa, mass people using violence against me, I really don't even hold it against a lot of these younger, especially the college kids, because I think that the elders that should know better are pushing them towards this type of action, that know that this is not the proper way of doing things.
So you're saying that you feel that the older generation is encouraging younger people to be violent and express themselves in this manner, and it's not necessarily something that they would have had naturally. It's something that comes as a result of the previous generation encouraging. Or did I don't think I'm right.
You added a little bit more to the end, but that is fine. That's not really what I meant. I think young people are naturally kind of like full of energy, and that can either go positive or negative. There's a reason why jails and prisons are generally full of young people at first, and they grow old there, because you're young.
Let me stop and reflect that back, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So, so you're saying that young people can go either positive or negative, but they tend to have a lot of energy that could be used for violence.
Yes. And I think I've only got 30 seconds, so this is the last one. I think people on the higher ups, the elders, so to speak, are using the youth's angst, so to speak, for as a political, violent political tool.
Okay, so David, you're saying that you think the older generation is using the younger generation's angst as a political tool.
Yeah, I feel heard. Thank you.
You're welcome. Jessica, would you listen to me?
Sure, of course.
Okay, so I guess the first thing is I consider myself a pacifist. I do get very angry at the world around me, especially since the 2016 election. But pacifism is something that I really value.
Anything else?
No, you can reflect that, and then I'll go on from there.
I heard you say that you consider yourself a pacifist, but since the 2016 election, you felt anger, but you haven't acted on it somehow. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah,
Because you are a pacifist.
yeah. Having said that, you know, I understand why a lot of people, both on the right and the left, are extremely angry and can get extremely violent. But I don't think it's the way to get things done.
And you just said that you think both sides of the political spectrum are extremely violent, but your personal opinion is you don't think it's the best way to get things done.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I don't think both sides are extremely violent all the time. I think they can be. They have the potential to be, and some are. A small minority are.
Yes, you're just talking about individuals and not large groups of people. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah. And as far as when I think ahead to where things might go or where I think things might go, I do think there may be a time in the world to be violent. But I personally want to avoid that for as long as I can.
You just said that you think there's a possibility that at some point it might have to be a violent world, but you're hoping to avoid that.
I'm not thinking that it'll be a violent world, but I think there may be a time in the future where violence is called for, but I want to put that off as long as possible.
So you're saying that you're hoping that that wouldn't happen and you could put it off. Any response that would be violent on your part could be put off.
Yeah, I feel heard.
So now anything else?
No, that's it. You can feel free to take your turn.
Okay, thank you. Personally, I think the political violence that's going on, it's being.
It's
Hang on.
just,
Yes,
Jessica, if you could just pick who you're going to speak to.
Pardon?
If you could just pick who you're going to speak to, like how I picked
I'm
David and
speaking to
then David
Nicholas.
picked Nicholas.
I'm speaking
Yeah.
to Nicholas and Jessica.
Okay.
Maybe it might be good to keep the rotation. What do you think, Edwin? Because I mean, we can't go back and forth because then it doesn't really go around, and
But
people.
do we go next to someone else? Is that what happens?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
you
think
And
can
you
speak
pick
to me
whoever-
or Corey. We haven't spoken yet. So if you select one of us.
So does that work for you, Jessica, to pick Edwin or Corey?
Should I pick someone?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
either Edwin or Corey because they haven't gone yet, so that way it's a healthy rotation.
I'll pick Corey.
Okay, does anybody else want to keep the time for this? For this round?
I will.
All right, thanks, David. Go ahead, Jessica.
So I go ahead with you, is that right?
Mhm.
Okay, as far as ethics are concerned, the political violence that's going on now, I think there's probably a portion of people on both the right and the left who it's recreational violence for them, and it doesn't really meet any particular needs like food or housing for their families. They just enjoy being violent. And I think some people get swept up in that. And the older people, like David said, might be trying to push it on people. And people don't realize the consequences of their actions.
He's
Hold on, let me go ahead and catch up with you. So for you, you feel like a lot of the political violence that's going on is a form of recreation for certain people on both the left and the right, and you agree with somewhat with what David said about elders using political violence to achieve political goals, and you don't think that it's about meeting immediate physical needs.
Yes.
Did you say something else that I feel like there might have been something else in there?
I don't remember.
Okay, well, go ahead and go on.
Another thing is, I think the atmosphere, particularly here in California, in this part of California, that the violence against people who don't share your particular ideology, it makes a lot of people very timid about expressing themselves politically. Like I would never wear a Trump hat out around here, or a button, or even put anything on my car, because there's a great likelihood that the property would get damaged, or I would get damaged, and I'm not a wealthy person. I can't afford to replace those type of things or be in the hospital.
So you, in your view, the violence that is directed at someone who airs political beliefs, okay, you're seeing that people are less tolerant of someone whose ideology they disagree with, and you believe that in your area of California, you would be afraid to be seen with any kind of Donald Trump or heavily right-wing paraphernalia or symbols, because you would be afraid that violence would result, or violence would be directed at you.
I didn't say anything about heavily right-wing, but I just
you said Donald. Okay, sorry.
Something that disagrees with the dominant political ideology of this area, I suppose.
Okay, so anything that doesn't agree with the dominant political ideology of what is you see right around you would be tolerated.
Yes. That's all I have to say right now.
There's a bit of a background noise. I don't know, is there a radio on or something? Or
Oh, maybe it's my TV. I'll turn it off.
oh,
You can also just mute your audio.
I did it.
okay.
Thank you.
All right, Edwin.
Okay.
Go ahead and talk to you. So it's I want to say it's really good to be back in doing this again, and I'm glad we have an evening one now. But wow, I'm hearing a lot of I've heard a couple times so far. People don't seem to recognize any other needs besides immediate physical ones, and it's definitely, I'm definitely seeing how empathy is just one piece of a larger system of NVC, and I'm kind of saying to you, but hoping it's heard by the room, that I think there's a lot more needs that are as vital for people to really thrive as food and water. There's people need community and a sense of belonging and connection with each other, and they need hope and creativity and recreation, autonomy, and all these other things that I think are really invisible to people who haven't really thought about what people need in besides just the very bare minimum physical basics.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing there is that it feels good to be back, be in an empathy circle again, and that you're wanting to point out, or you see a lot of different needs that are beyond just food, shelter, and clothing, these sort of basic human needs, that there's sort of these feeling needs, like a feeling of community, of togetherness, of belonging, of hope, and just pointing out that there's all these other types of needs that are out there too, and you feel maybe that they haven't been addressed.
Yeah, and I guess I really want to be heard that I don't think that these needs are less important in the long run than the basic survival needs. I mean, surely you need certain things to keep up your physical body going, but I think that to really I think having more than that is really vital. And even in a physical way, people, it's well known by now that stress and trauma have a physical responses and affect the body in physical ways that can be measured. And I think that these deeper needs shouldn't be seen with as being less important or less vital than needs for the basic physical subsistence.
So you'd like to, it's like point out that
alive and breathing doesn't mean that their needs are being met.
Sorry, I didn't catch that last part.
So just because someone is alive and breathing doesn't mean that their needs are being met.
So you'd like to, what I hear is that there's the needs for, so the physical needs are on par with these emotional needs. And that just because you're alive and breathing and maybe even have enough food doesn't mean your real, needs are being met, because these other human needs like community, hope are just as important as these other ones.
Yeah, and there are physical effects that can be measured and tracked from not having your deeper emotional needs met.
So if these deeper emotional needs aren't met, that there's physical manifestations in your of that. So they're physical in a sense too.
Yeah, I think that's all I have for right now.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to me.
Sure. I'll speak to Megan.
Okay.
Yeah. So this was an interesting topic. So I wanted to make it to this one. I've had interactions with BAM, which is By Any Means Necessary, which is left-wing political group, and I had set up the empathy tent and had invited a right-wing leader into the tent right at UC Berkeley, And they came and sort of tried to shut it down just by screaming and yelling, and chanting, I guess, screaming and yelling, just by chanting, just like really loud. So we couldn't even hardly talk to each other.
So this is an interesting topic for you, and you wanted to make it because you had this kind of intense experience where you invited a right-wing person into the empathy tent to have a dialogue, and a group of people under the name of By Any Means Necessary came and were chanting so loudly that you couldn't hear each other.
Yeah.
And it effectively made it impossible to talk or do what you're trying to do, right?
Yeah, and then we sat there and actually invited them into an empathy circle. We said, "Would you like to take part in an empathy circle? We'd love to have you." And a couple of points they said, "Not right now." So they said that to one of the members. So it was. So anyway, that's kind of one kind of story that comes up with the whole By Any Means Necessary approach, which I don't really agree with. I don't agree with the means sort of justifies the ends, and I like that the means are the end. We have to use, if I want a culture of empathy, I have to use empathic means to create that culture. So
with that experience, you asked some of the people who were part of that group if they wanted to take part, and at least one person, it sounds like, said not right now.
Yeah.
But then in general, you're just saying that you don't really agree with the idea of using any means necessary, including violence, and that you think it's more like the means create the ends. For example, empathy, like, can create an empathic culture.
Yeah, and that's a question for me, is how to do that. There's one thing sort of saying it, but then the details is a question, because I do think that there needs to be, that the empathy movement needs more assertiveness, to be out in public and to advocate for a culture of empathy. And, it's not just sitting like, oh, please be empathic, world, and everybody kind of ignores us. So it's a bit like Martin Luther King or the civil rights. You had they did the lunch counter sit-ins, and they kind of exposed like this violence that's in the culture, and they kind of confronted it. So I think that we need, for building a culture of empathy, somehow we need to confront sort of the lack of empathy in the system.
So you're saying that advocating for empathy is one thing, but actually doing it is something you're still figuring out.
Yeah.
And that you want to have an empathy movement that's assertive and like takes inspiration from the civil rights movement, like lunch counter sit-in tactics, to expose the lack of empathy in the world in a confrontational way.
Yeah, in kind of going up against the social structures and I've done that a little bit in Berkeley, and I don't want to go into the details of it just because of the time. But it's like how to do this. Like I'm imagining an Occupy Empathy, or going to the state capitol, setting up the empathy tent, saying we're here until the representatives, the assembly members, the left and the right, conservatives or liberals, have empathy circles with each other. So it's taking an assertive step, but the direction is wanting, calling on them to have empathy circles and to foster empathy between each other.
So one idea that you've had to be assertive and confrontational with the empathy movement is to set up a protest or an encampment at the Capitol in Sacramento and say, we're not leaving until the representatives empathize with each other.
Exactly. And then the encampment, we would do around the clock empathy circles. So it'd be 24/7 empathy circles that we just set up the tents, and then we have empathy circles, and we say, look at the citizens, the community can empathize with each other. Well, why can't you? If you want a democracy to work, the core of a democracy is people dialoguing with each other and working things out. So, yeah, that's it.
So part of that idea is that in the encampment there'd be people having empathy circles with each other, and it's like the citizens are modeling to representatives how to have a functioning democracy with dialogue.
Yep, I feel heard. Thank you.
Okay, I'll talk to Jessica.
Hi.
Hi. So one thing I've actually been sitting with for a number of weeks when it comes to the idea of tactics is, I think for me, it's important to be aware of not only the tactics of people who are trying to change the status quo, but the tactics of people who are trying to maintain it. Like, for example, the police. So I'll just stop there.
So you were saying you're interested in the tactics of the people who are trying to maintain the status quo, as well as the tactics of the people who are trying to change it.
Yeah. And I am also concerned about people possibly using a sense of like self-righteousness and I'm being part of a movement as an outlet for aggression. But I think that a lot of the people criticizing it are not taking a critical eye to, for example, the way that police get, what they want done, which is ultimately with threat of violence or actual violence.
Let me think. I heard everything you
I
said.
don't think that was a lot.
You were wondering that the police were violent, and if people, could you say it again? Because I didn't really follow that.
Yeah, just I just want to bring awareness to that that police ultimately function with threat of violence or actual violence.
So you feel that there needs to be more awareness of the police and their resorting to violence and their actual violence against people.
Yeah. And I was thinking of this interesting example. I watched this documentary about like the protest movements in the 60s in the Bay Area. And there was an interview with a cop who said something about like breaking up a protest by hitting somebody in the knee or the chin with his like nightstick, and how that he knew if he did that, it would discourage them from coming back. I'll pause there.
So you watched a documentary about the police in the 60s, talking about their tactics to disable people by hitting them with a nightstick in the knee.
Yeah, it was like one specific cop who was being interviewed. I mean, he was older and retired probably, but he was an active police when there was like big protests in the late 60s in like Berkeley. And I was so appalled when I heard that, because my understanding of the like official police job is to apprehend people and, write them a ticket or arrest them, and then they might go to court. Whereas that man was taking it upon himself to be, punish somebody with physical violence.
So you were saying that your understanding of the police the duties of the police officers is to write people tickets and act in a interaction with civilians, but what you saw was the violence of the police against civilians.
Yeah. And how am I doing on time? While we're keeping track.
Minute 40.
So yeah, a while ago, David was bringing up how certain activists in the Bay Area like maintain the status quo, and like including with threats or actual like fistfights at protests and rallies. And I was thinking about how I don't think that's any different from police doing that. If any, and the police have more like sort of power behind it because they have all these systems in place that like they have to protect each other from consequences.
So you were seeing a similarity between the violence of activists with their violence maintaining the status quo with the police, and their violence maintaining the status quo.
Yeah.
So violence in your mind is being used to maintain status quo, whether it's community violence.
Maintain or change. But the maintaining part is often like less obvious because we sort of take it for granted, but that's just the way things are.
And it's being taken for granted.
Yeah. And I guess I'll pause. I'll stop there and let it be your turn.
So are we talking about tactics now?
Yeah, or whatever. You can talk about tactics or whatever related things.
The actual subject is ethics and tactics, or you can talk about whatever you want.
So just pick wherever you want to speak to now.
It seems the tactics that the police departments use.
You have to pick
you
some.
just pick
I picked
somebody like
okay,
anyone.
David.
All right. I'm listening.
Oh, I talked to you. Okay.
Yeah.
I think the tactics that the police use are usually, the civil authorities usually instruct the police department what tactics they need to use under certain situations. And it seems in the Bay Area, the police are being told to stand down and not get heavily involved in any street demonstrations. And
Hold up.
Okay.
I killed a lot of brain cells in my past.
Sorry.
You said that the civil authorities generally instruct the police on what tactics to use, especially in regards to protests and stuff like that. And you feel like in this area that the civil authorities are telling the police to stand down.
Yes. I think that's been evidenced by all the destruction that was going on in Oakland when the black box would come out and smash windows, and the police would just stand there and not try to stop them until. And in Berkeley, also, so they use the county sheriffs to stop the violence because the Berkeley Police Department is under authority from their civilian authorities not to stop the violence.
Okay, so you've noticed in instances in Oakland and Berkeley that Black Bloc would trash storefronts and stuff and attack people, and the local police would stand down, and that actually the county police had to get involved because the local police refused to do anything because the civil authorities of that city told them to not do anything.
Yes. And I do think there are rogue police officers that do commit violence against civilians, but I don't see it as an epidemic.
You said that you do believe there's rogue police officers that do unnecessary violence onto civilians, but you hardly see it as an epidemic.
Yes. I guess that's all I have to say for now.
Okay. All right, so I guess I'll go with Nicholas again. You there?
Yep, I'm here.
All right, right on. All right, ooh, as far as like ethics and tactics and polices, where to start? Yeah, I take this a little personal because Jessica was actually at this particular event, but I've been a target of masked Antifa ganging up on me. So my language can get a little colorful when talking about this sort of thing.
Okay. So David, you're saying that you take this issue very personally because Jessica was at the event and you've had confrontations with Antifa, and that you can use very colorful language in response to talking about the subject.
Yes. And what's the best way of putting this? I feel like a lot of this comes from people just not liking authority, which is natural, you know, and there's a healthy degree of that. But that also anywhere in human society or even in the animal kingdom, there's always going to be an order established one way or another.
Okay, so you're saying that you feel like a lot of this is a reaction to not liking authority, but you're also pointing out that even in the world of nature, there is usually an authority to answer to.
Can I just interrupt real quick? I think I'm hearing background noise, Jessica. If you can mute your microphone in the lower left-hand corner. So it's good if you're not speaking to just mute.
Okay, let me see.
It's on the very lower left-hand, it'll turn.
Oh, it's up here, so I just
Oh.
got to.
Oh, there you go. Thanks.
All right. So yeah, thanks for saving my time. So yeah, I think maybe it's due to lack of life experience or something that I think Antifa and groups that participate in black bloc type tactics need to realize that if it wasn't for cops, right-wingers would just blow their brains out.
Okay, so I'm hearing you say that I think it's because maybe lack of life experience or something along those lines, but you feel you need that groups like Antifa need to realize that if it weren't for police officers, right-wingers would blow their brains out.
Yes, because in any kind of, that's what happens when you mob up en masse and you attack another group. That's the only logical. I mean, if it wasn't a good, you know, like if it wasn't for police officers, that's ground for self-defense in a lethal sense. So I think, and that's just an example of what I said earlier about one way or another, order is established. There's always an order. So do you want it as an official department, or do you want it just might equals right?
So, David, what I hear you saying is that you again want to emphasize the point of the fact that there's always going to be an authority member, and you'd like to point out that in demonstrations and clashes like this, that it may be better to have a recognized civil authority than it is to have chaos. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, basically I'm saying that order, one way or another, order establishes itself. And if you don't have an organized civil authority around you, things just turn into a jungle where it's just might equals right. you know, and that usually leads to death.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is again that you feel it's authority establishing itself as a natural order, and
One way or another.
one way or another, yeah. And I'm sorry, I'm losing some of this. Can you repeat a little bit? I'm sorry.
I think you got the gist of it there. And that's the reason we have police. You know, if we didn't have police, then some other group would take control, and it's usually whoever's the baddest and who's the strongest and who's the meanest. And yes, police can get hands-on and can get violent, but if criminals would stop what they're doing, if you ask them nicely, then we wouldn't need police to begin with. So I think, all things considering, I think our police are pretty civilized.
Okay, so what I hear you saying is that you believe police are civilized, and you feel that the way the world works without them would be worse than the way the world works with them. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, worse as in whoever's the biggest, baddest, and toughest would control everything.
Okay, so you think things would be worse because whoever's biggest, baddest, and strongest would be in control if there weren't civil authority.
Yes, and I would love to suggest to any anarchists to try living somewhere where there is no law enforcement for a while. If there even is I guess you'd have to find some island somewhere. But yeah, order is important because I've experienced chaos and it sucks. It's fun for a little bit, but it sucks, and that's all I have to say.
Okay, so what I hear you saying is you would encourage any anarchist to try and experience life without a civil authority, and that you've experienced chaos before and it wasn't an enjoyable experience for you.
Yes, I feel heard. Thank you.
You're welcome. So Corey, has it been a while since you've gone? I think Corey and Edwin haven't gone in a while. Okay, so I think I'll talk to you, Corey, if that's okay.
Yeah, although I want to say if there's...
Are you hearing background noise? I can fix, I think that may be on my end. Hang on.
No, it's okay. I was going to say, if there's somebody else that you are really, like, deeply wanting to talk to, that's okay, too. Like, you don't feel like you must, like, there's not, the rotation isn't rigid. We just want to avoid getting into a back and forth.
That makes sense. So give me a second to fix this background noise. I'll be right back.
You got it.
AKA fix the cat.
Okay, my apologies. Cat problems.
Real. Oh, who's scooping time for this? David again? Or...
Okay.
Looks like David's got the time. So I'm hearing I'm feeling quite a lot of intensity in this discussion. And I'm doing my best to process that and sort my feelings out as we go through this.
So you're feeling a lot of intensity, and we're feeling really activated in this discussion. A lot of things are being activated, and you're just kind of trying to sort that out as we go.
Yes, and I think it's interesting that so many people here are from the Bay Area and have experienced larger demonstrations than I have experienced in quite some time. I understand and empathize with how disconcerting it would be to see such violent protests. And in a way, I feel like I'm missing out on something because I'm in a location that doesn't have such extreme activism.
So you're finding it really interesting to hear different people's accounts of people who live around the Bay Area of being in really large protests that get violent in bigger ways than our little crowds in Chico. And you have the sense of missing out on an experience because of being in an area where things tend to be a little smaller, a little tamer. Did I miss it? Did I get all that?
You got all that. I know that was convoluted.
Okay.
How am I doing on time, David?
You got about 4 minutes.
4 minutes. Okay, thank you, David. So I guess I've never been comfortable with authority or the way authority interacts, even civilly, within our society. But I do understand the need for it. But I also feel that the civic authority has conducted a lot of violations recently that are very worrying.
So you've never really felt comfortable with authority, even as you recognize the need for it in some places, but you feel like our current civil authority is going outside the lines of what's acceptable for them lately, and you find that worrying.
Yes. And it's not that I want a society that doesn't have authority figures or a way of enforcing civility, but I'd really like to see it executed in a different way.
So it's not that you want a society without order or authority figures, but you'd like to see it executed in a different way than it's being now.
Yes. And I think that's all I have to say for the moment.
All right, Edwin, I'm going to go ahead and come out and talk to you again.
Okay, listening.
Like Nicholas, I also feel always a lot of intensity around these discussions.
You're also feeling a lot of intensity in these circles and discussions?
Yeah, and I've been taking notes, and I'm really struck by the acceptance of sanctioned violence versus the condemnation of violence that isn't carried out by a state authority.
Could you say that again? I didn't quite get that.
I'm finding that I'm really, really struck by the sort of dichotomy between the acceptance of violence and tactics carried out by the state, even while there's some limited acknowledgement that maybe the violence has gotten a little out of hand from the state, but overall the any use or threat of violence by the state seems to be condoned and accepted, whereas anything that's outside of those state sanctioned boundaries is not condoned.
Mm. So you're getting a sense here in the discussion that you're hearing an acceptance the state can condone violence and not condoning violence that's outside of state condone state-based violence. So
yeah, and I guess I'm finding myself really, shocked doesn't feel like the right word, but it's definitely like oh wow, people are really seeing a huge difference in a different groups here.
So is it that you're surprised that people are not seeing that there's violence, there's state condoned violence and other violence, and they're sort of equal in terms of they're just violence?
I think that that's part of it. I think that I think we've talked here, we've talked in these circles before about shame and punishment not really being effective ways to get people to do what you want them to do. But it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like a more effective way has occurred to a lot of people, and it doesn't seem like people expect anything other than that, even from those who are considered to be in charge of keeping society going or whatever.
Okay,
Police.
So you're not hearing so alternatives to like state condoned violence. It's just sort of an acceptance of that and no sort of looking for alternatives.
Yeah, it's just even though we have discussed that shame and punishment don't make people want to change their ways, it's almost like there's a dissonance because even though that seems to be agreed on, it's violence is still, like, state sanctioned violence is fully accepted even though people don't really believe that shame and punishment motivate people.
Okay, so in the group, in the discussions here, you feel that there's sort of been an agreement that shame and punishment don't really change people, yet there's sort of a notion that state condoned violence is somehow does.
Yeah, or that there's not really, people are really not seeing another way, and I feel really sad about that because I think there are better ways, but that would involve like a real paradigm shift and not just like on a societal level. I don't think that's impossible. I just think it's going to take a lot more work to achieve.
So you're seeing that there are other alternatives to state condoned violence, and there's a sadness that people aren't like talking about that or kind of looking at those other possible options.
Yeah, and it would require, I think, a really fundamental realignment of societal values. I don't think that's impossible, but some days it seems really far away.
Yeah, so you're saying it's possible to find those alternatives, but it would really mean a realignment of society. And sometimes it seems possible, sometimes it seems, a far away possibility.
Yeah. But I don't accept the idea that, I mean, humans definitely have a tendency toward violence, but we have other tendencies as well. That there are other tendencies that can be explored and developed.
So we can have violence, and that's a quality, human quality that you didn't quite say could be nurtured. But then there's alternative qualities that could be, and tendencies that could be nurtured as well.
Yeah. I think that's all I have to say.
Okay.
I feel like
Great. Then I'll speak to David. Yeah, so what Corey is saying, I agree that there is another route. And for me, that route is the culture of empathy, is the empathic route. And it's, for example, the police, if they're using, violence or, that they could be trained in empathy, that, they could be, and they are actually in Berkeley. There's a lot of training, I think, for kind of listening and sort of empathic engagement.
Yes. You said that you heard what Corey said about looking for a better way of dealing with people, and you think that way is the empathic way.
Yeah.
And that you actually you would like to see it implemented more, perhaps with the official authorities. You actually do witness that, and I think you said Berkeley or Oakland.
Yeah, they do some training in listening. So,
yes.
but it's all the way around. So we have the right that would come to the rallies there, and then the left would respond with Antifa and counter demonstrations. And we had the empathy tent, which is like, a handful of people. And we're saying, sure, the right is here. We're here to listen. We're glad to listen to you. When I first went to the rallies and the right came there, and it was the 3%ers and Proud Boys and all that, I was a little nervous. I was like, oh, who are these people? But as I talked to them and just listened to them, they seemed really nice, as long as, we weren't trying to like fight or confront and just listen. It was actually, a pretty good connection, I felt, with them. So it seems to me having that empathic approach is really the way forward.
Yeah. You're saying that from your experience, when you first showed up at these rallies where there would be right-wingers and left-wingers, and that you notice a lot of the Proud Boys, 3%ers, and other right-wing groups would come up to you, and if you approached them in an empathetic manner, that they were actually somewhat pleasant to you.
Yeah. And I could not understand Berkeley, which is, it's just all these counter demonstrations, all this hubbub. And for me, it's like, why didn't Berkeley just say, well, let's sit down here. Let's set up a bunch of chairs. Let's set up a bunch of empathy tents, and let's listen to the right wingers when they came. And I think it could have. So that was kind of it. That that was just something I thought of. That's why we went with the empathy tent, because that's what I think is just that's kind of the way forward. That's the other alternative. And I was like totally shocked that there's like not more people wanting that approach. I mean, I was like totally in shock that that was the situation, that more people didn't join that.
Okay, so you were in that environment that you were in shock that no one on either side, the authorities, protesters, or anyone, there wasn't that many that were willing to make an empathetic approach, that you think the police might ought to like set out some chairs and have people talk it out.
Yeah, exactly. And have some, if people just talk it out. You see, people do try to talk it out at those rallies, and they just don't have the skills for doing it, and things kind of escalate, and then it just kind of like it comes and it blows up. So they just don't have the skills and the process for having those dialogues and the underlying sort of value system of, an empathic value system. And so that's the alternative, I think, that we can create, and that's part of what these circles is about. Can we start, creating those alternative ways of relating, or at least have these tools that can kind of help?
I totally went blank. You were kind of just reiterating that that you think the empathetic approach would be a lot better, and that you did see people try to talk to each other, but it would generally spiral out of control.
Yeah.
And that there's people around authorities or others that did not have the skill set of being able to have empathetic conversation.
Yeah, so it's up to us, folks. Nobody else is going to do it, so it's us. This is it.
Okay, so you think that we're the bastion of empathetic hope, essentially.
Yeah, we're the last best hope. So I feel heard. Yeah, thanks.
Story coming up. Yeah. All right. So, are you done? Okay. Who to speak with? How about Megan?
Okay.
Okay, I hear people, Corey and Edwin, speaking of other possible ways. They make some points, but I'm more of a pragmatic person, a realist, and truth be told, the sympathetic process, people have to be voluntary to do this. You can't force people to do this.
So when you hear Corey and Edwin talking about using empathy, like police using empathy or at like a large scale, that you don't know if it's realistic because it won't work unless people are choosing to do it voluntarily, and some people won't want to.
Yes. And I think different people have different idea of what function the police should serve. And the police essentially are just like softcore army. They're especially in a situation like that where you have like crowd control. It's not like a small domestic thing. It's like a huge groups of people. And I used to work in security, and I had a little training on what to do with riots and people in large groups. And people change when they're in a big group. The dynamic changes.
So you see police as kind of a army light, and are you also recognizing that people see the role of police differently, and that's kind of how you see it, as especially in large groups, that they're there to do crowd control, and that you had a training when you were working in security on how to handle riots, and that you're saying that it's important. That's the role. It's important because of how humans can be in large groups.
Yeah, that people are different when they get in large groups, and it's a lot more unstable and uncontrollable. And that's one reason why some people like that tactic. They like losing themselves in the mass, and it's a very addictive thing. Like just last weekend, I went to the March of Life parade or rally. It's hardly a parade, but it was a rally in San Francisco, and it was huge. And I'm a little on the fence on the issue of abortion. I just wanted to go to that because it was the first time in a long time I got to be part of a group where I wasn't outnumbered by protesters. We were the majority, and I could feel the energy of having that army behind me. And there was people look at us, they hated us, but there was absolutely nothing they could do to us because there was just so many of us. And I can see how people can get lost in a crowd, and it's very dangerous.
So you're talking about the feeling of whatever chemicals we produce in our bodies when we're in a crowd, we kind of get high on it, or like a power trip if there's large numbers. And talking about a personal experience you had of going to the March of Life rally, and how even though you're on the fence on the issue of abortion, but it felt good to be a part of a group where there were just so many people and you weren't outnumbered.
I wasn't outnumbered for once.
Yeah, you weren't outnumbered for once. Like for once you were part of a group standing for something, and even though people were looking at you and hating you, there was nothing they could do. There are so many of you.
Yes. Yeah, and that's the way it should be. I mean, I think people have a right to tell you what they think of you, but I think being part of a civil society, whether you realize it or not, there's a contract of being a civilian, and part of it is being civilized. And how much time do I got, Corey?
Minute and a half.
Okay, I feel like there's a spoken, unspoken contract of being part of society, of being civilian, and part of it is being civilized. And if you are acting uncivilized, you are breaking that contract, and therefore means can be used against you that are not civilized to straighten that path.
So you're saying that you feel like there's a social contract about just behaving in a certain way, and that if you aren't following that it's sort of an unspoken rule in society that people will do something to bring you back in line.
Yes, and I feel like the left have their own morality police, so to speak, and they want to have these mass vigilantes to enforce people that cross the PC line, so to speak. They want to punish those who have stepped out of line, that have broken their rules of the way they feel like people should act in society. But they're willing to bring the violence to people who did not start with violence. Basically, and a lot of people, I think it's a lot of sensitive kids that view the words as violence, and then they respond with violence, which is very different, I think.
So you're saying that you think that people on the left have a different moral code, maybe, than people on the right, and that when people are not behaving in alignment with that code, that I think there was kind of two things, like you were saying, like that young people are sort of used, maybe, to enact violence. Or, I mean, you said things like that earlier, so I'm getting confused.
Young people are kind of sensitive, and they've used
okay,
words.
yeah, you're saying that some people experience certain words or things people say as violence, and then they'll respond with physical violence. But that, for you, that's a very important distinction between those two things.
Yes. Yeah, it's a phenomenon. I don't agree with that. I think people, I think there's repercussions for actions, and there's certain things someone could tell me on the streets, and depending on my mood, I might react. I like to think I've got it under control, but my time's up. And yeah, I tried to
the last part if you want.
but I kind of went off at the end, so you don't have to repeat that last part.
Oh, just that you're saying that you could see yourself maybe, depending on your mood, reacting, someone saying something to you violently, but that you try to not do that.
That's basically, yeah.
Okay. I'll speak to Edwin.
Hey, listening.
So I kind of wanted to come back to just something that I've played around with. I think I've shared this in the group a little, or the Facebook group, about the idea of by any means necessary. I had this realization a while ago that I don't think a lot of the people who espouse that sort of slogan are actually committed to it. I'm framing this a little differently than you were. To me, empathy is by the any means necessary. it's like, the sort of implication with that phrase is, will you do the thing that you least want to do in order to achieve some goal? I'll pause there.
See, I wasn't quite getting it. You're talking about by any means necessary, and that that they don't really believe it, that they don't really mean what they're saying. That there's something else there. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, I guess first of all, I'll just repeat. I think that the idea of that phrase is, will you do the thing you least want to do in order to achieve some goal?
So so by saying that, you're saying, are you willing to do the thing that you least want to do to achieve your goal?
Yeah, because that's any means, right? Is, will you use any means, including the means you least want to use? I hope, yeah, I think you kind of reflected that. And then it's like, historically, that phrase, I guess, has meant violence, with the idea that violence is what we least want to do. Like, it's the last resort, historically. I'll pause there again.
So historically, this has meant that the thing that we least want to do is use violence. And are you willing to use that?
Yeah.
It's like the most extreme thing that you're kind of sort of, that you'd be willing, not, willing to do, I guess, or not willing to do in a sense.
And I guess that I actually kind of do subscribe to a by any means necessary philosophy, but I feel like the means are different. They're not, for me at least, it's not going and hitting people.
So you do subscribe to that that philosophy, or that understanding of the thing you would least want to do, but the thing that you would least want to do isn't to the level of hitting somebody. It's kind of like less than that in terms of violence.
Well, it's actually like, if I thought that the only way that I could help us as a society not descend into violent, racist tribalism was to go hit people, maybe I would. But I don't think that that is the best or the only thing I can do to try to avoid that outcome.
So,
and
this is, sorry. It's like, if you thought that hitting people or using violence was something that would stop racism, that you would do it? Is that?
Yeah, more than just racism, but what I'm really trying to get at here is that for me, something like this, like sitting through hearing people say things that, bug me to disturb me, like the spectrum sometimes of like bug me, disturb me, outrage me, that's the by any means necessary.
So for you, this level of really listening to everyone, things that bother you and hearing you, is kind of like the edge, the by any means necessary edge. And so when somebody says, are you willing to do by any means necessary, that you're kind of pushing yourself to the edge by doing this listening here.
Yeah, and I think I have my doubts sometimes, and there's definitely like maybe tweaks that I would like to see, but think there's also a lot of evidence behind listening and dialogue as a way to achieve positive outcomes. And it's just really fucking uncomfortable. But I don't know how to say this, but like, to me, it's like, I look at my fellow activists sometimes who are like on the left and maybe have some shared ideas with me, and I think that they're weak sometimes. Not the ones who are like directly suffering from injustice, but the people who are like, you know, armchair activists, but like rooting to punch Nazis, but they're just doing it from behind their computer. And that it would be a lot more productive and show strength of them to like show up to something like this.
Oh, okay. So the people who are saying, "Oh, let's go punch a Nazi," and all that kind of sitting behind the keyboard is saying that, you're actually seeing that as a sort of a form of weakness, and doing what we're doing here is really more of a sense of strength, of being able to sit and be and dialogue, and maybe that you would like it if they would try that.
And that it's like, this is like more extreme in a way, even though it doesn't seem like it is or should be, but it is in a way extreme. And it's like, I want to ask my fellow activists, are you willing to go to the extremes to create what you want?
Yeah, I think that's your time. But so if that like violence is extreme, well, going and listening to people and dialoguing with people you disagree with is even more extreme. So are you willing to like really take this to the ultimate extreme of going and listening to the people that you have problems with?
Exactly. Thank you. I feel heard.
Okay. Okay, I'll speak to Nicholas. If I spoke to you today.
You haven't spoken to me in a while, but I don't think you've spoken to Jessica in a while.
Okay,
either.
let me speak to Jessica then. Yeah. So, I like that comment about, if you want to do something extreme, go listen to the people you disagree with. I think that's really great, because nobody will do it. And not nobody, but so few people will do it. Like, yeah, it's crazy. It's like insane.
So you were saying that listening to people is more extreme than actually beating them up.
Yeah, and demonstrating against them and calling them names and, you know, chanting and all that kind of stuff. It's like when the right wing came to Berkeley after Charlottesville, I mean, Berkeley was just in this tizzy, I mean, a frenzy. And there was like a counter against hate, you know, Facebook organized event. And I posted there and I said, hey, who wants to go listen to the right wing? They're actually willing to talk. And like nobody would talk. And I keep saying this story again. I'm kind of tired of saying it because I keep repeating it, but yeah.
So you're kind of getting tired of expressing your hope for an empathy world that you keep talking about, because you don't seem to be getting any results.
Well, it's more that I get tired of telling this one story because I keep repeating it, that even the churches, a church group, I asked the person that was leading it, I said, hey, you know, Amber Cummings, the person on the right leading that this event, is willing to have an empathy circle. And the response was, no, I don't have time. And I think it has to do really with Megan is talking about it. So if people don't want to really, you know, do this really hard thing of talking with the other side.
So you're basically saying that even religious people who should be, your spiritual people who should be willing to have the time to have sort of an empathic conversation with different views of people don't even want to
Yeah.
participate.
And so my question is like, what do we do about it now? You know, it's like, I think it's really the only productive way forward. And how do we shift the dynamic from this escalating us versus them? You know, there's got like we have to do something, you know, to kind of shift that dynamic. And, you know, yeah. So it's like, what do we do? What can we do to kind of shift that dynamic?
So what you're saying is you would like to get a solution to this whole dynamic of people not interacting with each other on a civilized basis,
Yeah.
trying to
And
understand.
I would say it's an empathic basis. I think it goes deeper, that empathy is that extreme that Megan is talking about. It's
Right.
like empathizing is like even more extreme than doing violence in that sense, if you're talking about extremism.
So yeah, so you're just trying to find a deeper level of trying to understand the other person, maybe from a more inner point of view instead of just.
Yeah, and that empathy is that deeper extreme.
So do you feel like
Just that last part about the extremism of empathy.
right,
2 minutes.
that it's really going the extra mile with the empathy?
Yeah. So yeah, you know, we keep trying. You know, I'm kind of trying to figure out what can we do, because there are people come to the empathy tent, and it's like we're in the middle of, you know, Civic Center Park, and there's all this chaos, and they're coming over and say, "I'm so grateful that you're here. Like, so glad you're here. There's all this chaos, and here's this little, you know, glimmer of hope, and this is the kind of life that I want. But thank you for being here, but I'm kind of busy. I don't have time to kind of help out here." You know, so we get a lot of that too. So I just wonder about that, you know, like what's going on with that?
So you're saying there's just this dynamic of people saying that they want to come by and have a conversation, but they're too busy.
No, they're grateful for what we're doing.
They're grateful, yeah.
Yeah, they're sharing, and it's deep felt. I can feel the gratitude. It's like it's true. It's there. I can feel the warmth and the depth of the gratitude. But it's like they won't like say, "Okay, this is what I'm going to do." You know, I'm going to support this. I'm going to kind of learn how to do this.
So you're saying that even though people are very grateful about the empathy tent, they aren't willing to actually go out and put themselves out to broaden it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I feel heard. Thank you.
And
All right, before you go, Jessica, I just want to say we're at just about 8:45, so I think we have time for Jessica to go, and then we'll go ahead and do our wrap up.
Yeah, you're
okay,
stealing my job from me. I was going to say the same thing.
Nicholas, would you like to say some stuff? Nicholas?
Sorry, I was on mute. I will listen, Jessica.
Oh, okay. I would just like to say that I listen to people with different political views all the time here in the Bay Area, and I don't react with any violence or ill will towards anybody. And I try to listen to them. And I get frustrated sometimes because I know if I actually talk to them about my viewpoints on things, it would just turn into something unpleasant. So I usually keep my mouth shut.
So, Jessica, what I hear you saying is that you spend a lot of time talking with people from different political spectrums, ends of the political spectrum, and you don't voice your opinion very often because you feel the results might get violent.
Not violent, but just yeah, just people would just get angry and not talk to you, or it would just turn into something that you wouldn't want to be a part of.
Okay, so you're saying that
Day-to-day activities, like you could be in just well, you want to go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh no, you were saying that you try not to express yourself because it would make things unpleasant for people around you, you feel, or people would get angry, or there would be unpleasant experiences.
Yes, and it's often just sitting like if you're in a class, people will start talking about something, and like they just automatically assume that you're going to agree with what they're saying, and if you did disagree, then they would huff off and not want to listen anymore.
So it sounds like you're saying that it's very hard to voice a disagreeing opinion when a group is expecting you to agree with them. And was there more? I'm sorry.
No, I just said they would just huff off and either shut you down or not want to listen anymore.
Right. So you're saying that sometimes when you voice a dissenting opinion that people tend to shut down and don't listen to you anymore.
Yeah.
Is there more you want to share?
No, that's all.
Okay.
All right, thank you. In that case, I think, David, are you going to stop the recording and restart for kind of the closing part?